Hello, this is Hardin Coleman, Faculty Director for the Center for Character and Social Responsibility at Boston University's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. You're listening to the very first season of Caring, Character, and Community, the Center's podcast. In this season, we will focus on learning from leaders about how they integrate the ethic of caring, we'll focus on their own and others' character development, and a commitment to serve the needs of their community in order to guide and inform their leadership in times of crisis. This is part 3 of our inaugural season, which will focus on bringing you the perspective of 4 youth-serving community-based organizations. In today's episode, we are delighted to have Mossik Hacobian, who has served as the Executive Director of Boston's Higher Ground since June 2011. Prior to serving at Higher Ground, he worked for 33 years at Urban Edge, a recognized leader in community development corporations in the Northeast. One of the projects in which Mossik is deeply engaged is building a coalition with Boston Public Schools to eliminate homelessness for children, one school at a time. He is working on expanding this approach across the Commonwealth. Mossik, thank you for spending time with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your organization and how this past year has been for you.
So Boston's Higher Ground was founded in 2010 by Hubie Jones, a very well-known longtime leader in Boston and community activist and academician, and started dozens of community organizations, service organizations, and he was concerned that there were lots of resources in Boston, but outcomes were not getting any better for children and families in Boston's neighborhoods. So starting in 2008, he convened, every couple of months, he convened a meeting of about 30 or 40 practitioners, policymakers, government, philanthropy, and asked the basic questions: are you satisfied with what you see in Boston? And if not, are you willing to do something different? So those conversations eventually led to the creation of Higher Ground as a convener organization. We sort of somewhat facetiously say we don't do anything, we just get other people to do things together better. We are a very small organization. Sometimes I've been the only staff person. We're currently the largest we've been at 5.5 FTEs. And we are finally, after 10 years, facing substantial growth and potential, depending on resources, in terms of scaling up our work, both in the homelessness initiative and in another coalition we're coordinating, Surround Care Coalition, which we're also pleased is part of the Open Opportunity Massachusetts statewide initiative committed to education equity. So that's a very quick history of how Higher Ground came about. And just to say, we started out, before Higher Ground was founded, Professor James Jennings did a analysis of Boston's neighborhoods and came up with a sort of a neighborhood distress index and mapped that across Boston and showed that the neighborhoods in the Blue Hill corridor from Dudley Square to Mattapan Square were the ones with the highest distress. So Higher Ground started with the notion of focusing on that corridor, and we started at the Dudley Square end of it, and our offices are located close to just south of Dudley Square at the MLK Warren Street intersection. We share offices with Center for Teen Empowerment, and that was sort of the beginning of our very collaborative nature and of existence. And everything we do is with others. And my experience at Urban Edge was good training, because you don't do affordable housing and community development alone. Yep. So I've had 3 decades of practice in collaboration, and it was a natural fit for Higher Ground.
Great. Well, this past year has been a very complex one for us all, actually past almost 2 years now. So I'm wondering, for Higher Ground and particularly your work as you try to build these networks and coalitions, what have been some of the biggest challenges you've faced?
Well, it's certainly been a challenge not to work with people in person. In fact, about a year ago, we hired 3 people in the last 12 months virtually, and I didn't meet them in person for 4, 5, 6, 7 months. So a lot of our work happened and continues to happen remotely. So while the challenge has been not to be there in person, there's been some opportunities in terms of using technology to be able to communicate, do things digitally, do intake forms for our homelessness initiative online. And, you know, what we lose in not having in-person contact, we save in travel time. I mean, probably we're each saving 2 hours of travel time a day.
Yeah.
And that allows us to either spend more time on our personal needs and families or put more time into work. So, and, you know, despite the challenges, I think we've had probably more participation through Zoom at parent meetings, parent-teacher meetings, staff meetings, collaborative meetings, coalition meetings. So I'm not sure that after the pandemic is over, we will ever go back to the way things were, especially since a lot of our work is in the schools. We are seriously considering having sort of a kind of distributed system of where our locations are. I mean, this summer we did a summer learning academy at one of our schools, and our staff was basically at the school all the time. And if we can figure out an arrangement where schools can spare some space for us to have a place to work, we can spend part of the time in the schools, part of the time at home, part of the time at a smaller office. So it remains to be seen if we can turn this challenge into a great opportunity going forward, which with increased engagement for all our partners and parents and children.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly at the school district, we have found for meetings, there's much more parent participation when they have the access to Zoom and instead of having to come in the bowling building at night when they have other responsibilities, they can be available and be engaged, which is what's exciting and comes with its cost as well. But one of the questions I'd like to ask you is how does, from where you sit, how does issues of care, the ethic of care and being caring, serve your leadership, and how does that kind of guide some of your leadership decisions?
So I think one of the things that, by the way, Professor James Jennings recently did a 10-year case study of our first decade, which was a very helpful exercise for us to reflect on where we have been. I think one of the great accomplishments we feel, and James Jennings documented, is that we've built a great, very high level of trust with parents, with teachers, with principals, with the BPS superintendent, with the teachers union, with the community. So not that we don't have issues or disagreements, but overall, I think we are a very trusted community partner and intermediary. And when people can't reach anybody else, they know they can reach us. And sometimes we hear things from the schools where you would think they might figure that out internally, but we're sometimes an easier communication link with whoever they're trying to reach. So I think the trust level is probably the key thing that we have in terms of caring for the families we're trying to support and house and stabilize, in terms of the enrichment programs we're trying to bring to the schools so that they can improve their outcomes for the kids. And I think some of it has to do with, some of that trust has had a lot to do with us being able to bring together many partners, 7 partners in the homelessness case and 20 partners in the Surround Care Coalition, where we're raising funds on behalf of the coalitions, we're sharing funds. And by the way, nonprofits have this critique of they're always competing with each other for resources and they don't do things together. I've seen the opposite. We are working very well together. People are happy to support each other. We're happy to share resources, and I can visibly see a system change in progress. I can't see it physically, but I can see it developing in the teamwork across many organizations. So I think when folks see that kind of collaboration among the folks who say we're trying to help them, they have more confidence that, in fact, we do care. We're not just talk.
Yeah.
That we're working together and we're supporting each other and we're supporting the families. We're all there to help.
The two things you said that I was going to ask, well, how do you develop that trust? And two things you said, I want to make sure that those are some of the pillars, maybe others that I missed. But one is accessible, consistent accessibility. That when people reach out to you, you are open, they can trust, they look forward, and you follow through on that accessibility. And the other is a value of collaboration, that they're not just coming for you to be the fixer and you for the resources you bring, but part of that is saying, how can I lift up your issues and bring it to this community of collaboration, which is focused on success. And those two things consistently done develops trust. And what you're suggesting is being trusting is an act of care.
No, I think that's correct. I mean, I try, no matter how busy I get, I try to be responsive to folks calling within the same day or within the same hour. I'm a early riser, and I'm available all the time to anybody who's trying to reach me. And if I find out that our staff has not responded quickly enough, that's my first critique. And make sure you don't just make a call or send an email or send a text and then just wait because nobody answers. Call again, call twice a day, call the next day.
Yeah.
So that people know that you're paying attention. Otherwise, you send an email, you don't hear back, and you don't follow up. We're just another bureaucrat. And it's really important for us to respond. And the collaborative nature, I think, is, again, it's not surprising to me because both at Higher Ground and at Urban Edge, this is what we did. And I'm just inspired by the level of collaboration that exists across so many organizations. Now, some of us have been working together, in pairs or threesomes for the last 10 years. So part of what brought us all together is because we've had that experience together, many of us, and some of us just joined recently, but they're joining something that's already in progress. So I think both of those are key to Higher Ground's progress to date.
Yeah. So in that, what are some of the big challenges you face? I mean, that's hard work to be accessible, to collaborate, to reach out, to constantly be, quick returns. I have a lot to learn from you on that. But what are the challenges that you face, and sometimes where that may not work so well?
So I think as successful as we have been to collaborate with partners and with the schools and with DPS and with the teachers union, with the community, there are times that while we think we're offering help to a school, which may be overwhelmed even before COVID. My experience before COVID was where we went to one of our partner schools and offered something, unless there was immediate benefit with little or no effort on their part, they just didn't have time for it.
Yep.
And I understand that. And from time to time, we have to remind ourselves that when we're very busy, if somebody comes to us and says, I want to help you do this or that better, we don't have time for them because we're up to our necks. So I think the challenge is everybody is, even before COVID, but especially since COVID, everybody's flat out and exhausted. And finding the energy to do one more thing and collaborate without knowing what the result will be and how long it'll take, I think is a challenge. Now, again, the solution is to be always available, always present, so that when you get the call back from a principal, for a teacher, from a parent, you're able to respond and you can pick up where you left off. So I think I guess, I don't know if I can articulate this well enough. We're trying to change a system that's been going on for decades, if not longer. So people are used to a certain way of being. For example, one of the things we're trying to do is to mobilize parent voice in all decisions that affect their children. Well, parents are not used to being heard. They are used to being told what's going to happen. And again, the intention is to hear them, but in practice, that doesn't happen. So, my best recent example, I have a couple, but the one that you might recognize is when we were working with the Higginson Elementary School a few years ago. One of the things they said and we noticed is that they didn't have a playground.
Yep.
They had 2 sheets of asphalt. The kids got hurt every day going out to play. And so we worked with the parents and the teachers and applied for a community preservation grant of $500,000. And in order to get that grant, we encouraged first of all, the students did their own designs of what they wanted. The parents met with an architect who helped them do a schematic design to secure the grant. And then they came to school committee meetings. And I'm sure you might remember that for 5 school committee meetings in a row, parents testified, teachers testified, the children themselves testified and held up their designs. And some parents from other schools testified on behalf of this school. And eventually BPS supported the grant. We got the grant, the playground is operating. And now it's a great resource after the pandemic because the kids can go out and play safe.
Yep.
So that was a very good example to the parents that their voice does matter. But so that's one thing we're very focused on. We have in the Surround Care Coalition, we have a parent-teacher advisory group that meets every month. And although we spent a lot of time developing the plan and we got a grant from Children's Hospital to implement it, we said from the beginning, this plan is only as good as it meets the needs of the schools.
Yep.
And it meets the needs of the parents and the teachers. So although we meet with the principals regularly, we meet with the superintendent and the BTU president regularly, the monthly meeting with the parents and the teachers are key to us making the necessary adjustments to make sure the plan is responsive to what's needed. And what's needed changes from month to month and year to year.
Yep.
So we have to be nimble enough to adjust with them. So I think in that sense, that level of engagement is both difficult and time consuming, but it continues to build confidence that we're an available, accessible, trusted partner and they can count on us.
And it seems that is that personalism, that reaching out, being available in a local context is the driver of success for you. So in that, how do you think, but then also you're very active in building a larger community, a Commonwealth oriented. One of the things that we're associated with is this thriving families approach, which we're thinking about going across the Commonwealth. How do you imagine this kind of localism and high touch and expanding the size of the network? How does that work?
So I think it was helpful that I had the experience at Urban Edge before I came to Higher Ground, because Urban Edge is a community development corporation focused on a particular neighborhood, Jamaica Plain, Roxbury. There's about 25 community development corporations in Boston and about 60 or 70 in the state. Mm-hmm. So each one is focused in a particular place, and they make it their business to support affordable housing, economic development, open space development, job training, home buyer services, whatever is needed in that community. But we also, or the CDCs, are connected to each other through a Boston committee and a statewide association. So we're many times the CDCs are doing things together. Mm-hmm. And collaborating. So while they are focused in a particular place, they're part of a system or a network that has developed over the last, say, 50 or 60 years. And it's made Boston and Massachusetts one of the most effective places in the country in terms of community development, affordable housing. So I'm basically following that experience and saying, as you know, as part of Thriving Families of Open Opportunity Massachusetts, we're not talking with Lawrence about helping them launch the student homelessness initiative in Lawrence. And we've made some initial contacts with folks in Worcester about helping them do the same. Mm-hmm. We don't intend to go to Worcester, or we don't intend to go to Lawrence. Mm-hmm. We intend to use our experience, share our lessons, so that they don't have to spend 2 years planning before they launch their program. And we have a Zoom meeting scheduled next week with about 10 or 12 people from Lawrence, 10 or 12 people from our coalition in Boston, for us to share what we've learned, what they might want to adopt. And as you know, we've jointly applied for a grant that if we get it, that grant will help Lawrence launch its initiative with us providing some help. But we see ourselves, and by the way, on the homelessness front, having finished a 3-year pilot phase in 7 schools, we're now scaling up to 20 schools in Boston. And here too, what we've said to each of the schools that we're adding, if you have a partner that you're working with right now, who can do what Higher Ground and its other nonprofit partners have been doing, let us talk to them. Maybe they can do some of the work. We don't necessarily have to go to all over the city, to Charlestown or East Boston or Austin Brighton. If they have a partner that can do some of what we're doing, we can share the lessons, we can be a resource. And ideally, what will happen over time is there will be a citywide and statewide distributed system of practice of whether it's homelessness or enrichment programs, whatever it is that's needed in that particular community, that there's a local coalition that has learned how to address those needs in that particular community.
Mhm.
So that's the theory.
Yep.
We're beginning this year to see if we can implement it, and I'm very optimistic that we will, assuming we can generate the resources both local and citywide and statewide.
Yeah. So one of the questions I like to ask, a little shift is, how do you think of the word, we use this word character, and we talk about our own character, developing ourselves and developing character in others. What part of the focus on character is part of the work you do, either for yourself or with the people with whom you work?
So one of my favorite quotes from my high school English reading was from Hamlet, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it shall not, it shall follow like the night to day, that you canst not be false to any man." And I've always felt like telling the truth as you know it. And obviously the truth is different for different people, but the best you can do is be true to yourself. And even if that's sometimes uncomfortable. So from an early age, I've kind of developed the capacity to tell the truth and to take the consequences. And it's not always been pleasant, because sometimes people don't want to hear it. They'd rather paper over whatever is going on. So I think, and both at Urban Edge and at Higher Ground, both on a board and staff level, I've been fortunate to be working with people who share that principle, that you need to be direct, you need to be frank, you need to be respectful, but don't play games with each other. We don't have time. Be honest, and let's use our honest differences, to come up with solutions that we can both live with. So in that sense, I think telling the truth, challenging a system that's not right, and you can't go around in any society, not just the U.S., and look at the inequities and say that that's okay. So what are you prepared to do? Are you able to step up and say this is not right? And what limb are you prepared to go on to correct it? So, and sometimes you have to say that to the very people that fund you, to the very organizations that support you. In my previous job at Urban Edge, there were times that we had to demonstrate against the banks that funded us and financed our projects, because they were not doing appropriate investment in the communities that were providing their deposits. Or we sometimes demonstrated against the city and state for policies that we felt were not right for the residents we were serving. So, and in all cases, our willingness to step out not only did not risk support by the banks and the public agencies, it actually increased the support, because they knew they were going to hear the truth from us. I was fortunate to early on in Mayor Menino's career to engage with him, and we developed a friendship. And there were times that I would tell him something and he would be upset and slam the phone down, because he didn't like what I said. But we would talk the next day, but he knew I was telling him what he needed to hear. So
Mossik, as you talk about being a truth teller, and both to yourself and to others, you're also speaking that you're in between people who have great need and people who have great resources. Can you give an example in both ways, Mayor Menino being one that you've already shared, where people had to test you, couldn't quite trust that yet? And what are the type of things people did to test your your trustworthiness to be a truth teller, and in that testing, what were some of your tactics you use to overcome the understandable disappointment that people question your integrity?
So I'm not sure that I can think of an example where it was tested. I mean, my experience has been mostly, if you do it respectfully, and it's not like you're just coming out of nowhere. You've had a relationship with whoever it is that you are challenging. So, for example, in the early 90s, both the Boston Redevelopment Authority and the Federal Reserve Bank did studies that showed that the banks were not investing enough in the communities that they were serving. So Urban Edge and 5 other organizations joined forces in something we call the Community Investment Coalition. And we demonstrated against the banks and we negotiated with them. And eventually we had a series of marathon meetings, some of them at 7 in the morning or 7 at night. And we developed, and the banks respected us for challenging them. And it led to some major, and I mean, over the 30 or 40 years since then, multi-billion-dollar investments in community development, not just in Boston or Massachusetts, in New England. So, in another example, when the state changed the 707 program into a voucher program, we felt that that was going to displace many of the tenants in our developments that we had housed using the 707 subsidy. And we put together a coalition of 12 CDCs, and at that time, Mayor Flynn, and we did a press conference and we said, we would rather default on our mortgages than evict a tenant who can't pay their rent because their subsidy is now a voucher and it's fixed no matter what their income is. And we were risking, obviously, if you default on a mortgage, nobody's going to lend you anybody anymore. But fortunately, what that led to the fact that the state agencies recognized that we had a point, and they restructured the loans so that by converting the 707s into vouchers, the loans would still be serviceable, and we wouldn't have to displace people because we couldn't increase their rents to the level they had to be in order to carry the mortgage. So those are 2 of many examples I could give where we took a risk, challenged our friends, in one case the banks, in another case the government, and if anything, it increased our stock in their eyes, because that continued to build the trust that we're telling them the truth. We're not just playing games. We're not saying this as a negotiating tactic.
Yeah. That's very good. So, can you give examples? So you've given lots of good examples of how, you focus on caring, building trust, giving the time, being accessible, being a truth teller, has been useful in kind of building collaborations and trust within a community. Can you give an example of when it did not work? And what do you think drove that?
Yes, it's very painful to share this example. So we were invited to our initial target area and our offices at the Dudley end of the Blue Hill Corridor with the resident association at the Warren Gardens development. It's a 227 unit cooperative. And part of the reason we started where we did was because the resident leaders there found out about Higher Ground and said, well, why don't you start at our end of the corridor? Because we have a lot of disconnected youth. If teen empowerment comes here, they can help reach out to the youth and we can reduce the violence in the neighborhood. And so that's part of the reason why we ended up where we are. And we found out very quickly that there was a conflict between 2 boards of directors within the development. There's a co-op housing board, which is the ownership entity. And there's a resident association, which is the nonprofit affiliate that's supposed to raise funds and provide services. And the board, even though they both represent the same 227 residents, they didn't see eye to eye. They had serious issues. And because there were different people on each board, if they disagreed, there was a deadlock about whatever it was going to happen. And we, at one point, became the sort of election observers for them to elect the board, that we encouraged the kind of overlapping between the two boards so that there would be more communication and less conflict. So early on in our 10-year history or 11-year history, we were seen there as a resource. Then it became clear to us that there were some practices within the development that were, let's say, questionable. We couldn't prove anything, but we were very concerned about some of the complaints we were getting from residents about the way they were treated, about favoritism, about nepotism, and so on. So we raised those questions with both the Mass Housing Finance Agency, which was supposed to be monitoring them, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which was financing them. And over a several-year period, and I remember at the time, City Councilor Tito Jackson advocated with us for changes in management, and HUD forced them to change the management agent because they felt that that's where the problem was. We had a couple of residents from the development on our board, on Higher Ground's board, because our attitude was, well, if we're going to be in this community, the residents need to be on our board. Well, they were so upset with us in the role that we had played in trying to hold the leadership of that development accountable to the residents that they both resigned from our board. And that gradually led to a schism between the leadership of the development and Higher Ground. And we've basically been asked to butt out for the last several years. The problems there continue. We continue to hear from residents. We connected them with a pro bono attorney so that maybe he could help them with some of their negotiations with HUD. We've made sure that the HUD, Mass Housing, the city are fully aware. But in the meantime, we've lost what I think an important opportunity to really mobilize the residents to really speak for themselves. And I think it was in part because we decided at some point, I guess about 2014, we decided following almost a year-long strategic planning process that we were going to focus on the schools.
Yep.
So, and that was a handful. So it's not like we had extra time to spare. So I think by deciding that we're going to focus on schools, reducing homelessness, improving educational outcomes, we had to sort of step back from organizing residents, which is what's really needed over there. We did try to communicate with other organizations that do resident organizing. We tried to get them to connect with the residents, but they either didn't have the capacity or they couldn't get the resources. And the development is still sort of continuing with some occasional calls that we get, which I feel terrible that we're not able to respond. But that's, I think, the one experience I can give where trying to hold everybody accountable resulted in us not being able to see it through. Now, I'm not giving up on it, but people know they can still reach us, but it's not something we're actively able to pursue because of our focus on education.
What's remarkable, what I heard in that is this ongoing, the time and energy into building thoughtful, careful, authentic relationships with everyone engaged is kind of a driving force in your success. And then when those relationships don't cohere, that's the example that you're giving of it not working, that not enough people could join around a shared common problem, that they could work collectively. And at that point, things start to fall apart. But as you're suggesting, you're still ready to give time and attention to it, but you're recognizing that the relationships aren't there at the level necessary to really keep moving forward. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct. That's correct.
So Mossik, thank you so much for this. But I have one more question I'd love to ask, which is, given your, the depth of your experience and the breadth of your experience, what advice would you give to your younger self? If you could go back and say, hey.
I knew you were going to ask that question from having listened to the previous podcast. So, what advice? I guess early on in my career, I was not as patient as I am now.
Mhm.
On the one hand, I think I would advise my younger self to be more patient.
Yep.
On the other hand, my younger self would probably advise me that I'm too patient now. So I suspect that the solution is somewhere in between. But
Mhm.
I think what drives not just me, but the people within Higher Ground and our board and staff is this passion to right things that are not right. And it is hard to tell somebody who's homeless that it's okay, they need to continue to be homeless. It's not okay. It's hard to tell some family that their children are not succeeding in school because the school system is failing them, but they need to be patient.
Yes. Yeah.
I think inequity is built into the system in many, many ways. Some of it you cannot help. I mean, I'm not tall enough to be a basketball player. I'm not fast enough to run the sprint or the marathon. So there is inequities in terms of what our natural abilities are and what we can do. But inequities that have to do with social constructs or government policy or community practices, those are things that we should not tolerate and we should not be patient about. So I think early on, for a variety of kind of personal family history reasons, I had learned not to be patient and to be aggressive in seeking to right something that was wrong. But I think sometimes, I remember early on in my career at Urban Edge, a city official advised our board chair to send me to etiquette school because I was not deferential enough or polite enough or respectful enough.
Yeah.
And I would just sort of ask questions very bluntly. So I probably could have been a little more discreet in the way I communicated early in my career. And maybe now I'm a little too discreet.
Well, you know, having been on the other end of your great and direct questionings, the authenticity comes through and it consistently helps me consider what I was saying. And so I always thank you for your directness and the way in which you were authentically present in these conversations. So it's been so once again I want to thank you very much for sharing this time with us, and look forward to our continuing work as we try to move the system forward to be more serving of family and children. So thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to be your partner and co-conspirator.